They burned down my house for insurance and said, "She died in the fire." I was in the garage, filming everything. That's the headline the world would one day read, but on the night it happened, it was just me, the smell of gasoline, and a terror so sharp it tasted like metal in my mouth. I remember the sound first. A slow slosh, 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 like someone carelessly pouring water on dry earth. But it wasn't water. It carried that sharp chemical sting, gasoline crawling beneath the garage door and stabbing at the back of my throat. I froze. Completely still. The cold concrete pressed against my knees as I crouched behind boxes I'd been sorting for my daughter's visit. I had only opened the garage door halfway earlier to get some air. Maybe that tiny gap saved my life. Maybe it doomed me. I still don't know. Through the crack under the door I saw shadows. At least 2 sets of feet. Heavy boots. Steady steps. No panic. No rush. People who pour gasoline calmly at midnight aren't strangers. They're planners. They're confident. They're close. My fingertips trembled, but I forced them around my phone. I hit record. A voice, low, steady, horribly familiar, whispered, "Make sure the bedroom side's soaked. She'll be asleep." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought they'd hear it. I knew that voice. I had sat across from it at Christmas dinners, heard it laugh when the grandkids played. But hearing it here, in the dark, planning my death, I felt the world tilt. Another voice replied, "Once it's lit, we call it in. Total loss. Insurance pays out in a week." By then, a soft chuckle. "She'll be nothing but ashes." Ashes. Me. They were talking about me like I was trash they needed to haul out. The gasoline smell thickened, choking the air. I pressed my sleeve to my mouth and tried not to inhale. Then a flare of orange light beneath the garage door. A match. A spark. A whoosh of ignition. Flames caught instantly, racing across the porch, licking the siding, spreading like they had been waiting. My house, the home I built for 40 years, lit up like it was made of paper. I felt heat press against the garage door, warping the metal. The temperature climbed in seconds. Sweat ran down my face, but my body was ice. I should have run. I should have screamed. But I just knelt there, phone in hand, filming, because one truth hit me with brutal clarity. Someone who loves you never burns your house while you sleep. Someone who wants you gone does. And whoever was outside wanted me gone. The fire roared louder. Sparks began dropping from the ceiling. The garage door trembled like it might buckle inward. I had seconds, maybe minutes. But before I escaped, before I screamed for help, before I even realized where I could run, I heard them again. One of them said quietly, almost tenderly, "She'll be dead before the flames even reach the garage." That's when I realized the worst truth of all. They knew I was inside. And they were counting on it. The heat hit me like a punch to the chest. The garage was a furnace now. I could feel the walls pulsing, the metal overhead groaning as though it wanted to collapse. My phone trembled in my hand, the video recording still rolling, capturing everything. I told myself, if I die here, the world will know. They can't erase me completely. Outside, the fire was a living thing. Flames licked the siding, crackling, snapping, painting the night orange. Smoke swirled under the garage door, thick and acrid, curling around my ankles, trying to force me down. I gagged, but I held my breath and inched toward the workbench. I couldn't think clearly, but I could observe. That's what instinct did when panic struck. You scan, you calculate, you survive. The shadows outside moved with purpose. Not random arsonists. They knew the layout, the entrances. They moved toward the back, toward the bedroom wing. And then I caught it, the glint of a metal object. A knife? A crowbar? It didn't matter. Their intent was clear. They were making sure I didn't leave alive. My mind flashed. Who? It had to be someone I trusted. No stranger could have known my routine, the layout, my habits, my hiding spots. And yet here they were. My own family. I refused to believe it, but the whispers outside, one male, one female, matched the voices I had heard at dinner countless times. My son. My daughter-in-law. I wanted to scream their names, but my throat was dry and the fire would have drowned my voice. I scanned the garage for escape. There was the old service door, always painted the same beige as the house, usually locked. I fumbled for the keys I kept on a hook by the shelving. My hands were shaking violently. Each second felt like an eternity. My chest heaved with the smoke. The smell was overwhelming, burning my lungs, making my eyes water. Suddenly, a bang outside made me jump. Someone kicked the garage door. The metal rattled. I could hear them laughing softly, almost mockingly. I realized then they weren't worried. They were certain. Certain I wouldn't get out. Certain no one would see what they were doing. The match of fear and rage ignited inside me. I couldn't just survive. I had to leave evidence. Proof. And the only way to do that was to stay alive. I crawled to the back corner of the garage, my head inches from the floor to avoid the thickest smoke. I could hear the crackle of flames climbing up the house and the faint, horrifying sound of shattering glass. My phone's camera caught it all: shadows, boots, voices, fire, a record of the betrayal. I forced myself to think beyond survival. If I live through this night, they won't get away with it. Not with me alive. Not after what they've done. A new sound sliced through the roaring fire, the squeal of tires. A neighbor? A late passerby? Hope sparked in me like a match in the darkness. I pressed closer to the garage door, straining to see through the smoke and flames. And then I heard it. Footsteps running toward the driveway. A voice screaming. Not mine. Not yet. Someone else had seen it. But would they reach me in time? Or would the flames and my own family's betrayal trap me forever inside this inferno? The flames were spreading faster than any fire I had ever seen, as if the walls themselves had been soaking in gasoline for weeks, waiting for this exact night. The heat rolled through the garage in suffocating waves, pressing against my skin like molten hands. My throat burned with each breath, and every inhale felt like dragging razor blades deep into my lungs. Smoke coiled around me, thick and determined, clouding my vision and shrinking the world into a suffocating blur. Still crouched near the floor, I pressed my ear to the cool concrete, desperate for any sound that wasn't crackling wood or collapsing beams. That's when I heard it, the frantic footsteps pounding up the driveway, fast, uneven, terrified. A voice, a woman's voice, shouted something I couldn't make out through the roar of the fire, but it wasn't the mocking tones of my daughter-in-law, nor the cold familiarity of my son. This was panic. This was someone who hadn't expected the fire. Someone who wasn't in on it. Hope flared inside me, fragile but alive. But then behind that voice, another sound emerged. 2 sets of footsteps running, no, charging toward her. Heavy. Determined. And then the voices I knew too well cut through the night like knives. My daughter-in-law's snarl. Get her out of here. My son's cold, deadly whisper. She can't see anything. Move her. My whole body locked. They were chasing the witness. They weren't afraid of being seen, they were afraid of being stopped. Through the smoke-hazed gap under the garage door, I glimpsed a chaotic blur of shadows. A woman, young, maybe mid-20s, was backing away with her hands raised, shouting at them to stay back. My son advanced with the slow, dangerous patience of a man who had already crossed one moral line tonight and was more than willing to cross 10 more. Flames illuminated him from behind, painting his face in hellish orange light, revealing something feral in his expression. I had never seen him look that way. Not even during the worst moments of his temper. This wasn't anger. This was calculation. And that, more than the fire, more than the betrayal, was what sent a cold spike through my spine. My son wasn't panicking. He wasn't improvising. He was following a plan he had thought through. The woman screamed and darted backward, stumbling toward the street. My daughter-in-law lunged to grab her, but the witness slipped away, sprinting into the darkness, her silhouette swallowed by the night. I heard a furious curse. My son's voice rose, sharp and furious. Forget her. We finish this now. My heartbeat pounded so loud I could barely hear anything else. Smoke stung my eyes as I crawled toward the side door of the garage, the small service door I hadn't opened in months. I prayed the lock hadn't rusted. My fingers shook so hard I could barely turn the key. The metal scraped. Jammed. My stomach dropped, but then with a final desperate twist, the lock clicked. Relief flooded through me, brief, fleeting, because before I could stand, a sudden boom rattled the garage, knocking tools off shelves and sending a rain of dust from the rafters. The fire had reached the main gas line. I had minutes, no seconds, before the entire garage went up like a bomb. I pushed the door open an inch, just enough to let in a gasp of blessedly cool night air. The contrast between the inferno behind me and the fresh air outside made my head spin. I clutched the doorframe to steady myself. That's when I heard them again, my son and his wife, coming closer. Too close. Their footsteps scraped across gravel, whispers sharp and frantic. Is she dead yet? My daughter-in-law hissed. The garage will go up any minute. She's done. my son said. Then he laughed. A low, satisfied laugh that felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. Insurance will think she was asleep, he added. Mom always goes to bed early. That line nearly broke me, not because it was true but because it meant they had mapped out my routine, tracked my habits, studied my movements, all while smiling in my face for years. I stayed frozen behind the cracked door, barely daring to breathe, terrified they would hear even the smallest sound. My son paused. The gravel shifted beneath his boots. He turned his head, listening. My heart stopped. Then my daughter-in-law spoke, her voice a tense whisper. We need to go. The neighbor girl probably called 911. Fine, he snapped. We'll say we were out for dinner. That we came home and saw the fire. Cry a bit. Make it believable. Her voice softened into a trembling imitation of grief. Oh my God. Mom's inside. She didn't make it, he chuckled. Perfect. That'll work. And with that they moved away, footsteps fading, hearts made of stone. I pushed the door open farther and slipped out into the night. Cool air hit my face like a salvation I didn't deserve. My knees nearly buckled, but adrenaline kept me upright. Behind me the flames swallowed the garage whole, roaring louder, hungrier, angrier. I clutched my phone to my chest, my only weapon, my only proof, and forced my legs to move. Not toward the street. Not toward the neighbors. Toward the old shed at the edge of my yard, hidden under the shadow of the oak tree. It was dark. Secluded. And for now safe. As I crossed the yard, smoky air swirling around me, one thought consumed me with a fire hotter than the one destroying my home. They think I'm dead. And that meant one thing. One advantage. One chance to survive and to make them pay. I slipped into the shed and shut the door behind me just as the garage exploded, lighting the sky in a blinding burst of orange. The shockwave rattled the walls, but I didn't flinch. I sank to the dirt floor, trembling, clutching my phone. They believed I had burned with the house. I was a ghost now. And ghosts don't just haunt. Ghosts hunt. The shed smelled of damp wood and dust, but it was sanctuary enough. I sank to the floor, pressing my face to the rough planks, listening to the chaos I had narrowly escaped. Behind me, the fire devoured the garage, sending sparks and embers into the night sky like blood in slow motion. The heat radiated even at this distance, a reminder that my home, everything I had worked for, every memory, every photograph, was gone. My chest heaved, my lungs still burning from smoke, but the first sharp edge of fear had dulled. Now raw adrenaline mixed with clarity. I was alive. They believed I was dead. And that meant they had let their guard down. That mistake would be their undoing. I pulled my phone from my trembling hands. The video had captured everything, the gasoline being poured, the sneering faces, the smug confidence in my own son's expression, the precise choreography of betrayal. My hands shook as I watched fragments of my life flicker on the screen, captured in flames and shadows. I realized then, I couldn't go back to the police just yet. They could spin the story. Claim it was an accident. My own son and his wife were clever, practiced in lies, in controlling perception. If I went straight to law enforcement, I might end up trapped again, this time in a maze of disbelief, of denial, of manipulation. I had to build my proof, my safety net, before anyone could silence me again. The first step was to disappear. To become someone who didn't exist in their world. I gathered what little I could carry. A backpack with water, a change of clothes, and my phone, the lifeline that held the evidence of their crime. The night was quiet beyond the fire, a strange contrast to the inferno behind me. Crickets chirped, and the distant hoot of an owl punctuated the darkness. I could almost pretend the world was normal if I ignored the roar behind the garage, the faint crackle of flames consuming the remnants of my life. But I didn't ignore it. I let it fuel me. Fear had kept me alive once. Now anger and betrayal would drive my next moves. I crept through the backyard, careful to avoid stepping on anything that might make a noise. Every shadow felt like it was alive, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Memories of my son and daughter-in-law's voices, their laughter at dinners, their casual cruelty, played over in my mind. How had I not seen the signs? The subtle manipulations, the cold calculation behind their smiles? It was all clear now. They hadn't just wanted money, they had wanted control. My life, my freedom, my very existence. I realized the fire wasn't just a tool to claim insurance. It was a message. I could be erased. And they believed they had succeeded. But they hadn't counted on the stubbornness of a mother, the instinct to survive, the will to fight. By the time I reached the edge of my property, the flames had begun to die down slightly, replaced by the hissing of smoldering wood. I paused, listening for footsteps, for signs that they were searching for me, but the night was empty except for the crackle behind me. The road was dark and deserted. I had no car, no way to call for immediate help without risking detection. I decided to move toward the town, slowly, cautiously, hugging the shadows of trees and hedges. Every step felt surreal, the night alive with danger and silence, the smell of smoke lingering in the air, burning my nose, a constant reminder of what I had narrowly escaped. I found a small, abandoned park at the edge of town. A bench under a street lamp offered the illusion of safety. I sank onto it, taking deep breaths, trying to steady my shaking hands. My phone still recorded, and I reviewed the footage, making mental notes. Timestamps, movements, the sequence of actions. Every detail mattered. Every frame would be proof of their intent, their method, their betrayal. I realized I would need allies, people who could understand the truth without being manipulated. Friends I hadn't thought about in years, neighbors I had once trusted, maybe even strangers who had nothing to gain but justice. As I sat there, the adrenaline slowly ebbing and replaced by a cold, calculating focus, I knew the next step was planning. I couldn't confront them now. They were still armed with advantage, with control, with the audacity of someone who thought they had won. I had to be smarter. I had to be invisible until the moment I struck. I began to map their routines in my mind. Who left the house at what time, when neighbors were home, when the world would be watching and when it wouldn't. I could use their arrogance against them. They believed me dead. That belief was my shield and my weapon. Hours passed. The night deepened. The town slept, unaware of the horror that had unfolded at my home. I stayed in the shadows, documenting, planning, breathing, feeling the weight of every choice, every possible mistake. And slowly, a new feeling began to take hold, not fear, not despair, not anger, but a quiet, deadly patience. A patient determination. I would survive. I would reveal the truth. I would make them face the consequences of their actions, and no lie, no manipulation, no insurance claim would ever erase the crime they had committed. As dawn approached, the first gray light touched the horizon, washing the world in pale, cold clarity. I felt the fire of the night begin to cool, replaced by the colder, sharper fire of purpose. I tucked the phone close to my chest and whispered to myself, almost as a vow, almost as a prayer. You think I'm gone? You think I can't fight? But you've just awakened the storm you never imagined. And in that quiet, early light, the first whisper of my plan began to take shape. A plan that would expose everything, bring them to justice, and reclaim my life from the ashes of betrayal. Morning light crept over the horizon slowly, washing the town in pale silver as if uncertain of what it would reveal. I sat beneath the overgrown branches of an oak tree at the edge of the park, cold seeping through my bones after hours of trembling, smoke-stained breathing. My hair smelled of char, my clothes clung to my skin with the sour stench of fear, and my hands, still blackened, shook uncontrollably as I wrapped them around my phone. Every breath was sharp. But as the world brightened, something inside me hardened. The night had taken everything, my home, my trust, the illusion that I was safe in my own family, but it had left me alive. And ash, no matter how fine, always held its story. They would not bury the truth. They would not bury me. As the sun lifted, I tucked myself deeper into the tree's shadow, watching activity stir around the park. Cars hummed past. A jogger stretched by the fountain. A dog barked from a fenced yard. Life, oblivious, moved on. But in the distance, faint like a memory, I heard sirens wailing toward what had once been my home. Fire trucks, police cars, EMTs all racing in synchronized panic. They thought they were responding to a tragedy. They thought they were searching for a body. They had no idea the dead woman was sitting under a tree, breathing, thinking, planning. That irony alone steadied me. My stomach clenched with the first wave of hunger, but fear still sat heavier. I studied the footage again, wincing at the harsh sounds, the crackling flames, the unmistakable voices of my son and his wife. The camera shook when my hands trembled, but everything that mattered was there. Their faces, their words, the pouring gasoline, the laughter. I paused the video when my son whispered, "She'll be dead before the flames even reach the garage." That single sentence, casual, confident, became my anchor. The sound of it was proof enough to damn him. I closed my eyes, The image burned inside my mind more viciously than the fire that destroyed my home. There was no going back now. The police might believe them. The insurance might pay them. The town might gather around them with casseroles and sympathy as they cried fake tears on my front lawn. But I would not let them build a future on my ashes. I forced my stiff legs to move and made my way toward the town library. The doors wouldn't open for another hour, but they had an outdoor charging station, intended for teens and homeless folks who needed a place to power their phones. I plugged mine in, hiding in the shade of a brick pillar, watching the battery bar slowly climb. My eyes burned with exhaustion. Every blink came with a flash of orange from the fire. But I stayed awake. I needed this device more than my next breath. With shaking fingers, I copied the video to multiple places: cloud storage, email drafts, a friend's old message thread, even a secure note app one barely remembered installing. I sent the video to a burner email I'd made years ago. Layers of protection. Layers of truth. Let them try to destroy every copy. They'd have to kill me a second time to do it. When the library doors finally opened, I slipped inside unnoticed. The air was cool, sterile, scented faintly of printed paper and old carpet, a stark contrast to the smoke that still clung to me. I found a corner computer and pulled up the town news site. My heart slammed when I saw the headline blinking at the top. House fire on Maple Ridge, one presumed dead. They had already assumed it. They had already shaped the narrative. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling uncontrollably as I clicked the article. And there they were. A photo of my house engulfed in flames. A quote from a neighbor describing the horrifying tragedy. And worst of all, a picture of my son holding his head dramatically in his hands, his wife leaning into him with fake tears shining like glass beads. If I didn't know the truth, I might have felt sorry for them. Their performance was flawless. The reporter mentioned that authorities believed I likely succumbed to smoke inhalation. Likely. As if I were already a memory. I stared at the screen, fury rising like lava inside me. But beneath that fury, something colder lived. A creeping awareness that the police would look at those grieving faces and see tragedy, not guilt. I needed undeniable proof. Not just a video. Not just a recording. Something else. Something physical. And suddenly it came to me: the garage. The tools. The lock. The melted gas can they left behind. In every crime, the fire tells a story: its color, its behavior, its speed. Fire investigators were trained to read those clues, and I knew one thing with certainty: the blaze wasn't natural. It wasn't electrical. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Directed. Federal. They couldn't explain that away. And the investigators would find it. But there was a risk: if they thought I had died in the fire, they might attribute everything to a tragic mistake or malfunction. They might never look deeper. They needed a reason to suspect foul play. They needed a reason to question the people sobbing on my burnt lawn. And I was the reason. I had to reveal myself, but not without strategy. Not without safety. Not without leverage. I logged out of the computer and slipped out of the library as quietly as I'd entered. The sun was climbing higher now, warming my cold skin, casting long shadows across the streets. I started walking, slow but steady, toward the one person I trusted, an old friend from church, a retired nurse who lived alone and minded her own business. Someone with enough sense to hide me and enough steel to believe me. Every step hurt. My lungs ached. My legs shook. The world tilted when I walked too fast. But I kept going. The town felt different now, colder, sharper, full of eyes I didn't trust. I moved like a ghost through my own life, invisible and watching. People chatted on porches, sipping coffee, unaware that the woman they mourned was walking past them in smoke-stained clothes. Dogs barked. A child laughed. Life infuriatingly continued. And somewhere my son was probably gripping a mug of coffee, his wife dabbing fake tears, both rehearsing the story they'd tell detectives. But I had something they didn't. Time. Silence. Invisibility. And proof. By the time I reached my friend's house, the sun was fully up, warming the dew on her garden roses. I knocked once softly and waited. The door opened. She stared. The shock in her eyes was instant, wide, genuine. "My God," she whispered. "They said you were dead," I finished. My voice cracked as I stepped inside. "Good. Let them think it." And in that moment, standing in her doorway, ash still clinging to my hair, I felt it fully. The shift from victim to strategist. The beginning of justice. The birth of something they never expected. I wasn't done. I wasn't gone. And I was coming for the truth. Night settled like a heavy curtain over the neighborhood, thicker and darker than usual, as if even the moon didn't want to witness what was coming. I sat in my friend Helen's living room, her old floral couch beneath me, the faint smell of lavender from her diffuser mixing strangely with the lingering smoke in my hair. My hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea I could barely taste, and my eyes kept drifting to the window every few minutes. Every crack of a branch, every car rolling by, every shifting shadow made my heart jolt. I wasn't just running now. I was being hunted by people who believed I was already dead, and that made them far more dangerous. Helen paced, her slippers whispering across the hardwood floor. "You can't stay here long," she murmured, dread gripping her voice. "If they find out you're alive, they won't," I whispered. "Not yet." But a part of me wasn't sure. Because people who commit murder for money, people willing to burn down a house with their own blood inside, don't just walk away once the flames die. They make sure. And they clean up loose ends. I was their biggest loose end. We kept the lights off. Only the faint glow of a lamp down the hall cast a soft pool of light, leaving most of the house in shadows. Every sound outside amplified in the dark, the distant rush of cars, the whistle of wind through tree branches, the faint hum of crickets. My chest tightened with every passing minute. Helen watched me with worry etched into every wrinkle on her face. "We need to go to the police," she whispered fiercely. "Right now." "Not without more evidence," I said. "Not until I know how far they're willing to go." Helen hesitated, but she didn't argue. She knew my son. She'd seen the flashes of temper, the way he'd twisted words, the way he'd isolated me from friends over the years. "They won't expect me to be here," I added. "They think I died in the fire. They'll be celebrating tonight, not searching for me." I wanted to believe those words. I wanted to cling to them like a shield. But then, somewhere outside, gravel crunched under slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart stopped. Helen froze mid-step. Her eyes widened and her breath caught. The footsteps weren't fast. They weren't panicked or confused. They were purposeful, patient. The kind that belonged to someone checking, someone looking, someone who expected nothing but silence in return. Someone confident the woman inside the house they burned was now nothing but bones and ash. Helen's hand trembled against her mouth as we both leaned toward the window, careful not to disturb the blinds. Behind them, just barely visible under the dim streetlight, two figures stood near her front yard. My son and his wife. My blood turned to ice. They weren't home grieving. They weren't resting. They weren't overwhelmed with sorrow. They were out here searching, confirming, sweeping the area like predators, making sure their prey was truly gone. My daughter-in-law whispered something and my son nodded, his jaw tight, his face cold with determination. He scanned the street, slow and thorough. I sank to the floor before his gaze reached the living room window. My hands clamped over my mouth to catch the small gasp threatening to break free. Helen knelt beside me. "What do we do?" she mouthed silently. I pointed toward the hallway. We crawled, literally crawled, away from the windows, the floor creaking softly beneath us like an unwanted alarm. Helen guided me into the small guest bedroom near the back of the house, and we slipped inside, closing the door with agonizing slowness until the latch barely clicked. My heart hammered so violently I thought the sound alone would give us away. We pressed our ears to the wall. The muffled sound of footsteps grew louder. They were walking up the driveway. Coming closer. Then worse, coming up the porch steps. The wood groaned beneath their weight. Helen's hand found mine, squeezing so tight it hurt. Through the thin crack under the bedroom door I saw it. A shadow passing through the front hallway. "Check the windows," my son murmured. His voice, a voice I had known since the day he took his first breath, didn't sound like him anymore. It wasn't angry. It wasn't frantic. It was focused. Calculated. Hunting. My breath came in shallow sips as the sound of hands pressed against glass echoed from the living room. Then the kitchen. Then the side window. "If anyone sees her, if anyone saw her running," my daughter-in-law hissed. "They won't," he snapped back. "But if she somehow got out, we need to know before the police do." The implication wasn't subtle. If they found out I was alive, they would finish what they started. And Helen, God help her, had just collided with their plan by simply opening her door to me. We stayed frozen as their shadows moved through the front of the house, scanning each window, lingering too long near the one where I'd charged my phone earlier, checking for anything unusual. The doorknob on the front door jiggled once. My blood ran cold. They were testing it, checking if anyone was home. Helen covered her mouth with both hands. Another jolt. Then silence. Long, agonizing silence. And then, mercifully, the sound of footsteps moving away from the door. Down the steps. Across the yard. Back toward the street. My lungs finally expanded, shaky and desperate, like a drowning woman reaching the surface. But the danger wasn't gone. They hadn't left. Not fully. Their voices drifted faintly. "We come back later," my son's cold whisper floated through the night. "When the street's quieter." "And if she did survive?" his wife asked. "Then we'll handle it," he said simply. No guilt. No hesitation. Just the plan. The same plan that began with fire. When their footsteps finally faded into the distance, Helen collapsed onto the bed, shaking. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, trembling with a mix of terror and rage so strong it nearly choked me. They weren't just trying to get away with the fire. They were eliminating variables. Eliminating witnesses. Eliminating me. And if Helen wasn't careful, eliminating her too. The weight of that realization settled heavy, suffocating. I could not let them hurt her. I could not let them win. I lifted my head, wiping tears and soot from my cheeks, and whispered into the darkness with a voice that didn't feel like mine anymore, stronger, colder, sharper. "It ends tonight." Because this wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. And I wasn't hiding anymore. I spent the next morning sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I had fed my son mashed bananas, the same table where he had once done his spelling tests while bragging that he'd be a millionaire before 30. My hands shook as I wrapped them around a mug of chamomile tea, but the warmth didn't soothe me. It made the silence feel heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. The firefighters said the structure was unstable, that I could only take what was safe to grab from the garage area. But I needed more than clothes. I needed answers. So after they left, after the police finished their questions, after the sun climbed high and bright as if nothing had happened, I walked back to the charred bones of my home. The smell of wet soot and chemical smoke clung to my throat. The air tasted bitter. Each step through the blackened ruin felt like walking through a graveyard made of my life's memories. My bedroom was gone, collapsed, melted, devoured. The living room was only jagged beams and ash. But the hallway had survived enough to lead me to one thing that wasn't supposed to survive. My husband's old roll-top desk. Heavy. The fire had licked it, scorched one side, but it was still standing like a stubborn relic. I don't know why I reached for it. Maybe instinct. Maybe desperation. Maybe a mother's foolish hope that if I dug deep enough into the rubble, I would find something that proved my son couldn't have done this. Something that proved blood still meant something in this world. But as soon as I tugged the desk open, my breath stopped in my chest. Letters. Dozens of them. Some in envelopes. Some loose. Some typed. Some handwritten. All addressed to my son, or worse, to the two of them together. Insurance letters. Bank statements. Account transfers I had never approved. All signed with shaky versions of my own signature. My heart slammed against my ribs as I sifted through them with trembling fingers. Premium increase approved, Walker. Transfer completed, homeowner beneficiary updated. Secondary beneficiary, Evan Walker. My son's handwriting. My name forged underneath it. My vision blurred. I had to sit down before my knees buckled. These weren't documents they had prepared recently. Some were from 8 months ago. Others from last spring. There was even one from nearly 2 years back, when I had briefly been hospitalized after slipping on the icy porch. They'd planned this for that long? They'd tested the waters back then? My stomach twisted, nausea rolling through me. A mother's brain does something awful at times like this. It starts to bargain with reality, twisting the facts into softer shapes. Maybe he didn't know what he was signing. Maybe someone tricked him. Maybe. But every page I touched made the truth heavier. Then, tucked beneath a warped drawer, I found something that didn't belong there at all. My jewelry box. Melted around the edges but still intact enough to open. Everything inside was gone except one item. The locket my mother had given me the day I turned 18. My husband had slipped a tiny picture of our son inside it the year he was born. I pried it open with a fingernail and nearly dropped it. The picture had been replaced with a small slip of paper. 5 words scribbled in my son's handwriting slashed like a knife. We can't wait forever. My hands froze. My lungs forgot how to work. And beneath that paper, a printed quote, something generic, something used in condolence cards, something you only see when someone is preparing for death. She lived a long, full life. My vision tunneled. My legs went weak. I sank to the floor, ash puffing around me in soft gray rings. They had prepared this locket as a prop. A piece of sentimental evidence to show the police, the neighbors, the cameras. Proof that they mourned me. Proof they cared. Proof of grief they never intended to feel. My throat closed. A sound, half sob, half groan, escaped me before I could swallow it down. That's when I found the second drawer. The locked one. The one my husband always kept sealed, the one he said held tax records, the one I had never touched out of respect for his privacy. The fire had warped it just enough for me to force it open with a metal bar from the garage. Inside was a small black notebook. Old. Leather-bound. My husband's handwriting inside. The first page made my pulse stop. If anything happens to me, look at the insurance. My hands shook as I turned the page. If anything happens to Margie, look at Evan. My son. My baby. My boy who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares and whisper, "Don't ever leave me, Mama." The next entry was dated only 4 months before my husband died of what we all believed was a silent heart attack. He keeps asking about my policy. Keeps checking numbers. Something isn't right. And then the page that drained the blood from my face. I think he's planning something. If he hurts me, he'll go after her next. I read it twice. 3 times. The words blurred, smeared by tears I hadn't realized were falling. My husband had known. He had known our son had turned dangerous. He had known something was wrong. He had tried to warn me, but he died before he could. My breath hitched. Or maybe he didn't die of natural causes at all. My fingers went numb. The notebook slid into my lap. The world around me dimmed until only one thought burned through the smoke in grief and disbelief. They hadn't just tried to kill me. My son might have killed his own father too. The realization hit me so hard I had to brace myself against what little wall was left standing. The house groaned softly around me, beams shifting like tired bones. Somewhere outside, a crow called, sharp, cold, echoing through the ruins, and it felt like a warning. I wiped my face, closed the notebook with trembling hands, and pressed it to my chest. They wanted a clean story. A burned house. A dead mother. A payout to start their new life. But they had made one mistake. A fatal one. They didn't kill me. No. Now I had every intention of using the truth they buried to bury them instead. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the notebook, letters, forged documents, and my scorched locket spread out before me like pieces of a nightmare I was still forcing myself to believe. The dim yellow lamp cast long shadows across the room, shadows that jittered every time a car passed outside, making me feel watched even when I knew I was alone. But I wasn't afraid now. Not anymore. The shaking in my hands had stilled. The numbness had faded. What replaced it was something I had never felt so strongly in my life. Clarity. Not rage, not grief, not even hatred, just a cold, still clarity that settled over me like winter frost. I finally understood that my son had crossed a line long before the fire. Maybe long before my husband died. And if I wanted justice, I couldn't rely on police alone, especially not without a plan. If I walked into a station tomorrow and dumped everything onto a desk, he'd find out, he'd deny everything, and he'd twist the story in ways only children who know their mother's weaknesses can. Oh, I had to be careful. Silent. I had to let him believe I was broken, confused, maybe even grateful to be alive. And until I had everything lined up, the evidence, the motive, the proof, I would play the role he expected me to play. The scared, fragile old woman who posed no threat at all. That started the moment I called him. My fingers hovered over the phone for several seconds before I pressed dial, staring at his name glowing on the screen. When he answered, his voice was a strained mixture of forced concern and poorly buried irritation. "Mom? Why are you calling so late?" I swallowed the wave of bitterness rising in my throat and let my voice crack just enough. "Evan, sweetheart. I didn't know who else to call." I heard him inhale sharply. "Where are you?" "A motel," I whispered. "They're saying the house, they're saying it's lost." I don't know what to do. The long pause on the other end was deafening. I pictured him standing in his hallway, jaw tight, eyes cold, already recalculating his future now that I wasn't dead. When he finally spoke, his tone was carefully measured. "I'm glad you're okay, Mom. That's what matters." The lie slid from his mouth like oil. I almost dropped the phone. But I kept my voice small, trembling. "I don't feel safe." Another pause. "You can come stay with us." There was the invitation. The trap dressed as kindness. He wanted to finish what he started. I almost smiled. "If you don't mind," I whispered. "Just for a little while, until I figure things out." "Of course," he said too quickly. "We'll pick you up in the morning." I hung up before the tremor in my voice could turn into a scream. I didn't sleep after that. Instead, I spent the night preparing. My purse carried the notebook and letters, sealed into a zippered pocket. My coat hid the tiny camera the firefighters had given me. They used it to document their work, but when I asked if I could borrow it, they didn't question why. My husband used to say, "People underestimate older women. Use that. It's the sharpest weapon you have." And for the first time since he died, I felt like he was sitting beside me again, steady and calm, guiding me. At dawn, I checked out of the motel and waited outside with my small duffel bag. When Evan's car finally pulled up, my breath caught. He stepped out, expression twisted into a portrait of forced sympathy. His wife, Dana, remained in the passenger seat, eyes downcast, jaw stiff. They weren't grieving. They were disappointed. I could see it in the subtle tension of their shoulders, the tightness around their mouths. But I made myself shrink, pulling my coat tighter, letting my shoulders curve inward. I played fragile, helpless, grateful. And they relaxed. They drove me to their house, my husband's old truck still in their driveway, a reminder of everything my son had taken. Inside, the house was neat, modern, cold. No pictures of me. Not a single one. But on the refrigerator door, clipped beneath a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. A glossy brochure for a luxury cabin, remote, isolated, the kind of place where no one would hear a scream. And across the top, handwritten in my son's unmistakable script, "Winter getaway?" After things settled down. My pulse thundered. They weren't done with their plan. I wasn't supposed to have survived. I wasn't supposed to be sitting in their kitchen drinking lukewarm tea. They were already planning the second attempt, which meant I needed to move faster. Over the next few days, I played the perfect victim. I cried quietly at night. I thanked them for saving me. I apologized for being a burden. I let them think they were winning. Meanwhile, I searched every drawer, every closet, every trash bin. And I found things, small things, but enough to tighten the noose around their necks. A burner phone hidden in the laundry room, soot-stained gloves tucked behind the water heater, receipts from a hardware store purchased the night before the fire. Each discovery was a spark in the dry forest of my rage. Each piece brought the picture into sharper focus. On the fourth night, while they slept, I made my move. I slipped out of the bedroom they'd given me and padded down the hallway in my socks. Their office was locked, but locks don't stop mothers, not when their children have tried to kill them. Inside, I found the motherlode, a folder labeled Inheritance. Inside it, a notarized but forged document stating I had transferred full control of my estate to them. The date? 3 months before the fire. My signature? Crooked and shaky, nothing like my real handwriting. I took photos of everything. Every page. Every signature. Every receipt. Every secret. And when I finally closed the folder, a realization settled into me with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. For me. For my husband. For the woman I used to be before betrayal twisted my family into strangers. When I returned to my room, I felt lighter. Stronger. Ready. I knew what had to happen next. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. I wouldn't scream or demand answers. But I would take everything they had built on their lies and burn it down quietly, methodically, legally. They burned my home. Now I would burn their future. And by the time they realized what I was doing, it would already be too late. The next morning began like all the others since the fire, quiet, tense, with the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the kitchen because Dana never remembered to turn off the machine on time. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting my steps drag just enough to appear exhausted, traumatized, small. Evan barely looked at me when he walked in, but I watched him from under my lashes the way you watch a wild animal, You note every twitch, every shift, every flicker of the eyes because any of it can tell you when it's about to strike. He had his phone pressed to his ear, pretending to be deep in some financial call, but I could hear it, strain beneath the surface, panic simmering just out of sight. They thought they had time. They thought I was losing my grip, relying on them, walking blindly into whatever final chapter they were planning for me. They had no idea that while they slept, I had spent hours building the foundation of their downfall. That morning I made my first move. Soft, gentle one. The kind no one pays attention to. Over breakfast, I let out a trembling sigh and said, "I've been thinking, maybe I should update the insurance paperwork. Just in case something happens again." The two of them froze. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But I've known my son since before he could walk. I saw the flicker in his jaw, the faint narrowing of his eyes, the smallest stiffening of Dana's shoulders. "What kind of update?" Evan asked too casually. I stirred my tea. "I want to make sure you two are still the beneficiaries. You know, since the house is gone." Dana swallowed hard. For a moment I thought she might break. She was always the weaker link, the follower, the one dragged into schemes bigger than her conscience could handle. But she stayed silent. Good. Silence meant fear, and fear meant cracks. I could work with cracks. "We can talk about it later," Evan said quickly. "Maybe after the situation settles." I nodded as if relieved. "Of course, dear. You know best." And just like that, I saw something flicker in his eyes, a little easing of tension. He thought I trusted him. He thought I was walking back into his palm. Good. Let him think that. Let him believe the lioness was still asleep. Later, when they left for errands, I began my work. Real work. I slipped into their office again and photographed the inheritance documents in better lighting. I uploaded every image to a new email account and sent copies to myself, to an encrypted drive, and to a lawyer I had quietly chosen 2 days ago, a woman named Harriet Quinn who specialized in elder fraud and financial crimes. We had spoken once, briefly, and though I didn't reveal everything, the moment she heard forged signatures were involved, she told me to keep records of everything and not to alert the subjects. The subjects. My son. My daughter-in-law. How strange it felt to hear them called that. Around noon, I slipped the notebook and letters back into my coat, the coat I always carried, the one no one questioned. I left the burner phone where it was, untouched. I didn't want them to know I'd seen it yet. I wanted them comfortable. Complacent. Predictable. When they returned, I was sitting on the couch with an old family album open on my lap. I looked every bit the grieving, confused mother they hoped I was. "Do you remember this?" I asked, pointing at a photo of Evan when he was 8, missing his 2 front teeth. His smile faltered. "Yeah. Of course." But I really watched him as he stared at the picture. I saw nothing. No warmth. No remorse. No flicker of the boy I raised. Just calculation. That night my second move came. Quiet as a whisper. I waited until they were in the living room watching TV. I stepped into the hallway, lifted the small camera I'd borrowed, and filmed myself holding the insurance folder I had found, page by page, signature by signature. I explained everything into the microphone. The forged documents, the bank accounts, the fire, the threats, the whispers, the plan. I didn't cry. My voice didn't shake. I wanted it clear. Steady. Credible. Then I hid the SD card under the loose floorboard inside my room, one I discovered only because Dana had dropped a bobby pin earlier and it rolled there. By the time I returned to the living room, they had no idea their downfall was already documented, sealed, and delivered into the world like a slow-burning fuse. After dinner, they retreated to their bedroom. The house went still, and I made my third move. I called Detective Morales. Not the one assigned to my fire case. No. This was the detective who investigated my husband's death, back when we still believed he had collapsed from stress and age. My voice was soft, almost apologetic when I spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, "but something new has come up." The silence on the other end sharpened. "What kind of something?" "I don't think my husband died of natural causes," I whispered. "And I don't think the fire was an accident either." Morales didn't hesitate. "Mrs. Walker, where are you right now?" "In my son's home." "Is that a safe environment?" I let the question hang before answering. "It won't be for long." He inhaled sharply. "I'm coming tomorrow morning. Don't confront anyone. Don't go anywhere with them." "Oh," I breathed, glancing toward the bedroom where my son slept like an innocent man. I won't. When I hung up the phone, my hands were steady. My breathing calm. The fear that had once choked me now felt distant, like it belonged to another lifetime. I lay down but didn't sleep. I didn't need to. My eyes stayed open, watching the ceiling as the house creaked around me. This time I wasn't the prey. I wasn't the helpless mother waiting to be saved. I was the storm gathering on the horizon. Quiet. Inevitable. And when morning came, everything would begin. They burned down my home. Now I was going to burn down their lies, one ember at a time. The morning light spilled through the curtains in thin, sharp lines, cutting across the living room where my son and his wife sat sipping coffee as if the night of terror, fire, and betrayal had been nothing more than a bad dream. I watched them carefully from the doorway, my duffel bag slung lightly over my shoulder, the notebook and insurance folder safely tucked inside. Detective Morales had promised he would arrive by 10, and I had exactly 2 hours to prepare, to make every move count. I knew my son well enough to predict his routine. He'd check his phone obsessively first thing, as he had, and then pace the kitchen while Dana fussed over breakfast, carefully monitoring his moods for signs of control. I let them follow the script. I walked in slowly, carrying a small stack of mail I pretended I had just collected from the postbox at the front. "Good morning," I said, my voice soft, trembling at first, exactly as they expected. "I thought I should see what's arrived. Maybe something important." Dana's eyebrows lifted slightly, suspicion masked with practiced concern. Evan's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed nothing. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting the steam curl in my face, obscuring my expression just enough to mask the cold calculation underneath. Then, as casually as I could, I placed the mail on the counter, letting the letters slip slightly so that some of the edges peeked out. Bills, receipts, and finally the envelope I had photographed in the office, the one marked inheritance/confidential. My son leaned forward slightly, curiosity flickering across his face. "Mom, what's that?" I let a faint tremor lace my tone. "Oh, it's just paperwork," I said. "I thought it might be important for me to understand." And with that single phrase, the first domino tilted. They didn't know yet that the dominoes were rigged to fall with precision. As they leaned over to pick up the envelope, I felt my heart slow, my pulse aligning with the calm I had cultivated over the past week. This was it. I didn't move toward confrontation. I waited, watched, let them act first. They didn't notice my hand slipping subtly into my coat pocket, the tiny camera hidden there, recording everything, their reactions, their whispers, the quick glances that betrayed panic barely restrained. Dana swore under her breath when she saw the stack, fumbling as she tried to straighten the papers. "Why would she even have this?" she muttered, louder than she intended. Evan's voice was low, controlled, almost mechanical. "Let's just look at it later. Don't make a scene." But the tremor in his hand as he lifted the envelope betrayed the first crack in his composure. And that was all I needed. I let a small, barely audible sigh escape my lips, feigning nervousness. "I just thought I should know. I thought I should understand what's going on," I repeated. That phrase, the one that had been rehearsed, honed in my mind countless times over sleepless nights, sent a ripple through the air. I could feel the tension coil tighter in the room. Their eyes darted at each other, quick flashes of panic I had learned to read. That subtle panic gave me power. And I held it, savoring the moment. Then, when they least expected it, I reached for the envelope, pulling it to my side just enough to read the visible lines. The forged signatures glared at me in black ink like daggers. "Interesting," I murmured. "I wonder how these could have ended up here with my name on them." Dana paled, a small, sharp intake of breath, while Evan stiffened. I let my eyes linger on his face, calm, soft, deceptively fragile. "I mean, it says here I transferred everything to you. And yet," I let a pause stretch just long enough to make them squirm, "I remember signing nothing of the sort." Silence fell, thick and heavy. Then Dana spoke, her voice shaking just slightly. "Mom, it must be a mistake." I tilted my head slowly, letting the weight of disbelief hang between us like fog. "A mistake," I echoed. "You burned down my house for insurance. You tried to kill me. You forged my signature. And that's a mistake." The words landed like stones in a quiet pond, sending ripples through the carefully constructed facade they had maintained for weeks. Evan's lips parted, eyes narrowing, the mask of calm slipping just enough to show the man beneath, the man I had raised, corrupted by greed and arrogance. "Mom," he began, but I cut him off with a quiet, controlled laugh that sounded hollow, bitter, and frightening all at once. Don't. Just don't. I pulled the camera from my pocket, holding it up like a shield. Everything is documented. Every step. Every lie. Every cruel, calculated move you made, the fire, the threats, the letters, the forged documents, it's all here. Every detail, time-stamped, recorded, undeniable. Their faces went pale, the first real fear flickering through eyes that had never known consequences before. Dana's hand trembled as she reached for the papers, but I moved just slightly, stopping her. No. You will not touch this. Not yet. Not until the right people see it. I stepped closer to the counter, maintaining the illusion of fragility, and whispered, "The police will be here soon. And once they see this, you won't be able to lie no matter how hard you try." Evan swallowed hard, his jaw tight, and for the first time I saw the man I had once called my son truly afraid. Not of me, but of what he had done. Of the truth catching up. I let a few moments stretch, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable, a pressure cooker waiting to explode. And then, just as the first knock sounded at the door, sharp, authoritative, the calm I had cultivated broke just enough to let them glimpse it. "Detective Morales," I said softly, a hint of steel under the tremble in my voice. The knock came again, louder. I turned toward the door, letting them see my eyes, wide, haunted, and yet deadly focused. "You're not going anywhere," I murmured, the words soft but final. The storm had broken. They had believed they controlled everything, but for the first time they realized they didn't. And when Detective Morales finally stepped inside, the evidence laid out, my story told in the calmest, most meticulous detail, the air in the house shifted entirely. I wasn't just alive. I wasn't just a witness. I was a force of reckoning they couldn't escape. And for the first time in weeks I allowed myself to feel it. Power, justice, and the quiet satisfaction that betrayal, no matter how deep, can never hide forever. I didn't sleep at all after the detective left. My nerves were shredded, stretched so thin I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears like a drum in an empty church. I sat in the dark living room with a blanket around my shoulders, the house too quiet, too still, every shadow warping into something threatening. My hands trembled around a mug of cold tea I'd made hours earlier and forgotten to drink. I kept replaying the detective's warning in my mind, they might not be finished. The words had weight, sticking to my ribs like wet sand, making it harder and harder to breathe. My son and daughter-in-law were out there somewhere, knowing the fire hadn't killed me, knowing the insurance money was slipping through their greedy fingers, and knowing that the only obstacle between them and their payday was me. And I knew one thing about desperate people. When cornered, they stop caring about consequences. At around 3 a.m. I heard it, the crunch of gravel outside. My body went rigid. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The porch light was off and the curtains were drawn, but I crept toward the window like a ghost, lifting the corner just a millimeter. A car idled at the end of the driveway. But lights off. No movement. My heart dipped into my stomach like a stone. I backed away slowly, gripping my phone so tight my fingers numbed. I tried to call the detective, but the line rang and rang until voicemail clicked on. I whispered into the darkness, "Come on. Come on, answer." Nothing. So I dialed 911. But before the operator picked up, the car drove away, slowly, quietly, like it had all the time in the world. I didn't give my address. I didn't say a word. I just stood there shaking, listening as the engine faded into nothing. Sleep never came after that. By dawn, I felt hollow, drained, as if fear had eaten through every layer of me. Detective Rowan called just after sunrise. His voice was clipped, tense, an urgency I had never heard in him before. "We have new evidence," he said. "Don't go anywhere today. I'm coming to you." My voice cracked as I asked, "What kind of evidence?" There was a pause. Papers rustling on his end. Then he said quietly, "Your son and daughter-in-law were planning more than an insurance scam." My blood froze. "What does that mean?" I whispered. Rowan exhaled slowly. "It means the fire wasn't their only plan for you. It was the first." I sank onto the couch, knees nearly giving out. "Detective, what are you saying?" "I'm on my way," he repeated. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my breath shallow, my palms damp with sweat. My mind spiraled. Were they planning to stage another accident? Were they trying to make sure I never testified? How long had they been plotting this? How long had my own son been imagining a world without me in it? I didn't know, but the dread sat like ice in my chest. Rowan arrived within the hour, a storm of urgency in a wrinkled suit. He came inside fast, shutting the door behind him as though locking out a wolf. "We got access to their digital records," he said, laying a folder on the table with trembling fingers. "Search histories. Messages. Deleted files." His jaw tightened. "Your daughter-in-law reached out to someone a month before the fire in, how shall I put this, criminal circles. She was asking about methods that left no trace. Poison. Staged falls. And then there's this." He pulled out a printed text thread. "This is your son. A message he sent her the morning of the fire." He slid it to me. My hands shook as I read the words. "Tonight we're ending this. She'll be asleep by the time the flames start." My breath left me in a sharp, shuddering gasp. My vision blurred. I pressed my hand over my mouth. My own child had written that. My boy, the same boy I'd nursed through pneumonia, stayed up with during nightmares, walked to school each morning with sandwiches in his backpack. He had planned it calmly, casually, like discussing groceries. "I don't understand," I whispered. Why would he do this?" Rowan sat across from me, voice gentle but unflinching. "Money makes monsters out of people who already had shadows inside them." I closed my eyes, feeling a slow, deep ache spread through my chest. A grief so sharp it almost cut. Then Rowan leaned forward, voice lowering. "There's more." He handed me another page. This one was a bank statement. "Your son made a wire transfer for $15,000 2 days before the fire. To a man who's been linked to arson for hire cases." I felt myself sway. "They hired someone?" Rowan nodded. "They didn't just want the money, they wanted certainty. And that means they're not done. The moment you survived, you became a liability." I pressed my trembling hands together. "So what now?" He didn't answer right away. He stood, pacing the living room, eyes scanning the windows as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Finally he turned to me. "We're going to end this today. I've been granted warrants. We're picking them up within the hour." Relief surged through me but lasted only a heartbeat. "Detective, I think they were here last night." I told him about the car, the way it idled like a warning. Rowan's expression hardened. "Then we're moving faster." He pulled out his radio, stepped toward the door, and issued clipped orders, backup units, perimeter checks, before telling me, "Stay right behind me." We stepped outside together, the morning cold enough to sting my cheeks. 2 squad cars rolled up minutes later, lights off, silent but ready. Rowan leaned into one of the windows, speaking low to the officers. They nodded and split, one car heading down the road toward my son's neighborhood, the other staying behind to watch my property. I remained near Rowan, clutching my sweater, unable to stop shaking. He put a hand on my arm. "You did everything right," he said quietly. "But this next part might be messy. Are you prepared for that?" I swallowed hard. "I just want it over." He nodded. The radio crackled. A voice came through, tense. "Detective Rowan, we have eyes on the suspect's vehicle leaving the residence. Speeding. Possibly fleeing." Rowan's posture stiffened like steel. "Follow them," he ordered. "Do not engage until backup arrives." Another crackle. "They're headed north toward the highway." Rowan cursed under his breath. "They're running," he said. "Which means they know something." He rushed toward his car, motioning for me to stay with the officer on my driveway. But before he got in, the radio burst alive again. "Suspects are turning. Wait, no, they're doubling back. Heading toward the victim's location. Repeat, they're heading to her house." My stomach dropped. The officer beside me moved instantly, ushering me toward the back door of my house. "Inside, ma'am, now." But I froze at the sound of an engine roaring down the road, faster, louder, coming straight toward us. Rowan shouted into his radio, sprinting toward the patrol car. Tires screamed against pavement. A black SUV appeared at the end of the street, swerving hard, flying toward my driveway like a bullet. My heart slammed against my ribs. The officer grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the porch. Rowan shouted my name. Everything blurred into noise, fear, metal, and speed. The nightmare wasn't over. It was coming straight for me. The black SUV skidded violently in the driveway, gravel spraying like bullets, and my heart slammed against my chest as the doors flew open and my son and daughter-in-law jumped out, faces twisted with panic, disbelief, and anger. Rowan and the officers were on them instantly, the sound of handcuffs clicking against wrists deafening in the morning air, the officers' shouts sharp, commanding, leaving no room for argument. I stayed frozen, breath catching, tears streaming down my face as I watched my own child, the boy I had kissed goodnight after nightmares, the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved more than anything, being restrained, his wife beside him shaking, realizing for the first time that their carefully constructed lies had unraveled in the harsh, unyielding light of truth. Rowan glanced back at me, eyes soft but firm. "It's over," he said, voice low, steady, grounding me. I couldn't respond immediately. My chest was tight, my body trembling with a mixture of exhaustion, grief, and the strange, fierce joy of survival. The neighbors had begun to gather at the edge of the street, their eyes wide, whispers low, murmurs of shock and awe running through the crowd as the officers read the suspects their rights and led them to the patrol cars. The realization that everyone had believed I was dead, that my own son had tried to erase me, and that now, finally, justice was arriving. It hit me in waves so powerful I had to lean against the front porch railing for support. I felt hollow, and yet for the first time in months I felt free. The house behind me, though still scarred and crumbling from the fire, felt like a monument to survival rather than destruction, and the wind carried the faint smell of smoke that now smelled more like victory than terror. Rowan handed me a folder with copies of everything I had documented: the camera footage, the insurance fraud, the forged signatures, the bank transfers, the text messages, everything that proved the depth of their deceit. "You did good," he said again, softer this time. "Very few people have the courage and clarity to do what you did." I closed the folder against my chest, tears streaming unchecked, shaking as relief, grief, and rage all collided inside me. Over the next few hours, statements were taken, photographs snapped, neighbors gave their observations, and I remained calm in a way that felt foreign. I signed forms, answered questions, and watched as the police carted my son and his wife away, realizing that the children I had once raised were now strangers, their faces masks of guilt and disbelief. I felt a strange emptiness too. The betrayal cut deeper than any fire, any threat, any fear. My husband's notebook had been right. The shadows had been inside my son all along, and yet I had loved him. I had nurtured him. I had tried to teach him right from wrong. And now I understood that love, however deep, could not always protect from darkness. The media arrived later, and I gave a brief statement, careful, composed, telling only the necessary facts: the house fire, the attempted fraud, the arrest, the ongoing investigation. I avoided mentioning the personal horrors, the letters, the private threats, the harrowing nights of hiding. But inside I let myself breathe, let myself feel that strange, quiet power of being alive, of being heard, of being proven right when everyone had assumed I was powerless. That night, alone in a safe house arranged by the police, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not tears of fear, not tears of anger, but tears of release, sorrow for what had been lost, grief for the family I had once believed in, relief for the life that remained, burning bright like the embers in the ashes of the house that tried to take me. I thought about my husband, long gone, and the locket he had given me, the letters he never delivered, the love that had guided me even after death. I thought about the law, the officers, the detective who had seen through deception, and I felt a sense of balance restored to a world that had once seemed determined to destroy me. Days later, the trial began. My son and his wife sat in the courtroom, silent, faces pale, lawyers fumbling, evidence stacked so high against them that denial was impossible. Neighbors came to testify, the insurance investigators presented the fraudulent documents, and the detective recounted everything he had seen, including the camera footage I had hidden so carefully. I watched the proceedings quietly, tears threatening but under control, feeling the weight of truth settle into place, heavy, irreversible, righteous. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on multiple counts of attempted murder, arson, and insurance fraud, an almost surreal sense of calm descended on me. They were taken away in handcuffs once more, but this time it felt permanent. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, gasps, murmurs of relief from people who had followed the case, who had assumed I was gone, and I let a small, private smile creep onto my face. Outside, the sun shone brighter than I remembered, cutting through the crisp air, highlighting every scar of the charred driveway, the empty shell of what had been my home. And in that light, I realized something I had known all along but only now could fully embrace. Survival wasn't just a physical state. It was moral. It was emotional. It was justice. I had survived fire, betrayal, and fear, and in surviving I had exposed the truth and reclaimed my life. Later that evening I walked through the ruins of what had been my home one last time. The ash crunched beneath my boots, the faint smell of smoke still in the air, but the wind carried with it the promise of renewal. I paused at the garage, the very place I had hidden, and I whispered to myself, soft but certain, "They thought they could destroy me, but fire can't kill courage, and betrayal can't break a heart that refuses to surrender." I turned away, the sunset painting the sky in warm reds and golds, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders and the long, painful road of healing begin. And in that quiet, fiery moment, I understood that even after the deepest betrayal, even after the darkest night, a woman's strength and her will to survive was more enduring than any greed, more lasting than any lie, and more powerful than the flames meant to consume her. No fire can consume the courage that refuses to die, and no betrayal can shadow the truth when a heart stands unbroken.